just the same. Anyway, so thank you all. At the end of class last week, I think I mentioned that I had an oral argument coming up. And for the last almost 4 years, I've been litigating a case. Now, the case became somewhat famous because it involves 3D printed guns. And you may have seen a lot of headlines over the summer about a company in Austin, Defense Distributed, that wanted to put on the internet files that could be used to manufacture 3D printed guns. Now, if you don't know what 3D printing is, it's a way of designing a file on the computer and using this, basically an inkjet printer that spits out plastic, right? So it basically spits out plastic, creates objects. Now, you might think, wait a minute, Josh, isn't that a Second Amendment case? It is, and we've raised Second Amendment claims. But primarily, it's a First Amendment case. New Jersey enacted a law in response to us. They named us when they enacted it. And this law makes it a crime to possess a 3D printed firearm. Okay? We haven't challenged that portion of the law. We haven't challenged that. The state of New Jersey also made it a crime to manufacture 3D printed guns without a license, and we haven't challenged it either. The part we did challenge is a section of the law that makes it a crime to distribute to someone the information needed to make a 3D gun. No, Josh, distribute. This law makes it a crime to send someone a thumb drive with code on it. Okay. This law also makes it a file to put a file on the internet passively that someone in New Jersey may be able to download. Okay, just understand, the law makes it a crime to put a file on the internet that someone in New Jersey might download. Now, why is New Jersey banning this code, this information? They argue that this is not actually protected speech, that this is just instructions of a computer that can be used to manufacture firearms. And I was there arguing last week that this law was unconstitutional. And towards the very end of the argument, the judge asked me, I'm going to paraphrase, he said, basically, Josh, Mr. Blackman, as it were, is everything speech, right? Is code speech? Is everything speech? And my answer to him was basically, yeah. The Supreme Court has defined speech very, very broadly. And I think in particular, the information we have here is communicative. It shares information, tells you the size and dimension of various parts. This is code that just about anyone can understand if I gave you a 5-minute tutorial. But more importantly, it's been displayed in art galleries and studied in universities. It has a lot of scientific and artistic value. But of course, we acknowledge that people can download this code, and then with some intervention, they can actually use it to manufacture a gun. So this case directly implicates the first case for today, which is O'Brien, right? Where do we draw the line between speech and conduct, right? We haven't argued that making a gun is protected speech, right? We haven't argued that possessing a gun is speech. Now, of course, if I walk around with a 3D printed gun, I am conveying a message that I like firearms that can be manufactured at home, right? But is the actual possession of code that can be used to make a gun more like conduct? Is it more like burning a draft card, for example? Is a ban on sharing that sort of code more like banning the burning of an American flag in Johnson? So you might think you're all here having fun, but I was in court arguing about O'Brien last week as I was going for class. I won't tell you how it ends, and we'll find out when the court rules on this motion probably in a few weeks or so. Hopefully we win. We'll see. But these are issues that vex courts. And if you think you have difficulty drawing the lines between why flag burning is okay but draft card burning is not, you'll start to see how judges have difficulty with these questions also. And I think they grapple with these questions on a daily basis with issues a lot more complicated, right? Is a law that only applies to files used to make a gun content-based discrimination? You can have files make a bow and arrow or a knife or a machete, but not a gun. Does this remind you of perhaps a statute in R.A.V. where it only applies to certain types of offensive speech, not other types, right? You can make fun of perhaps people on the basis of their political ideology, but not based on their religion or their race. So these are all very vexatious. They're very difficult questions without particularly good answers either. All right. Yeah.
Was the other side arguing that it's like files to make a bomb? Like how that is?
Okay, so let me address your question. Believe it or not, you can publish a book that teaches people how to make bombs. You probably have heard of it. Is it? Oh, what? Oh, even better, yeah. The Anarchist Cookbook, books like these give you step-by-step instructions of how to make a bomb. Poison, chemicals, right? It's not that hard. Go to any bookstore, if they still exist, or on Amazon, you can find it very quickly. The usual question again is, what about, an atomic bomb, right? Or a hydrogen bomb. There's a species of information called classified information, whatever that means. And the courts have held that the government can restrict the flow of classified information. Those are very tough cases, but fortunately all of our information is in the public domain, so we don't really have that problem. But what New Jersey argues, and I'll try to do justice to their position, is that this is not information that's meant to express any ideas. It's merely this mechanical file that's used to make guns. And you have this image in your mind of like this printer just spitting guns out, which is completely devoid of reality. It's not how it works. It takes almost a full day to print a 3D gun. It requires a lot of ingenuity. You have to treat the chemicals with, you have to treat the plastic with chemicals so it doesn't break when you fire it. There's a lot of work that goes into making this. It's extremely difficult. Much easier to just buy a gun on the street in any given city. But the state of New Jersey calls the internet. And, we'll see. Yeah. We'll win eventually, just don't know what court. But I think we'll get a victory eventually. All right, any other questions on that? Yeah, Alicia.
I was just curious. We had a case this summer in court about kitty porn, where the guy downloaded the porn onto Dropbox.
So we'll do
it's a crime to download content.
We will do a case on child pornography. Child pornography is almost like an exception to the normal rule, right? So I'll give you a brief preview. Generally, pornography is fine, right? If people want to put pornography on the internet, they can do that. Mm-hmm. There's a special category of pornography called obscenity. And this is something that's really, really bad. Now, I actually said this in open court. We're all so debased because of social media. Nothing's obscene anymore. I think I truly believe that. Child pornography fits in a different category. The reason why the government can ban child pornography is because the creation of child pornography was itself a crime. Think about it, right? To have child pornography, there has to be a child who had things done. I'll just leave it there. Awful case, right? The thing that was done is itself a crime. So the government can ban the end product as it means to prevent the initial crime from occurring of molestation. Now, what happens, we'll do this case later, if you can use computer graphics to simulate child pornography, right? You take a person of age and then use Photoshop to make them look younger. So it's actually a person of the age of consent, right? They're 18 or whatever. But they Photoshop to make them look like a kid. And the court said that Congress can't ban that. So these are very tough issues about when you get into obscenity and child pornography. Very, very difficult questions. But thank you for asking. But yeah, I mean, the child pornography cases, those have been litigated forever and ever and ever because people raise these arguments. Right? But as long as they're of age, it's fine. I mean, you've had cases where adult strip clubs have put on performances of Shakespeare in the nude, right? To try and say, oh, we're artistic, right? It's literary. Yeah, sure. Okay, questions? All right, so let's talk about the first three cases. We'll do the Citizens United case last. Okay. So the first case we have today is O'Brien. The second case is Texas versus Johnson. And the third case is R.A.V. versus St. Paul. All of these cases involve a single common trait in that something gets burned, right? In O'Brien, it's the burning of a giraffe card. And in Johnson, it's the burning of the U.S. flag. And in R.A.V., it's a burning of a cross, right? And each of these actions, right, was done to convey a message. They weren't burning these items to create warmth, right? They weren't burning these items to create light, like a candle perhaps. They were burning these items to convey a message. And in each case, they were also burning their own stuff, right? It's not like they were burning someone else's stuff, right? They burned their own draft card. I think Johnson got the flag to someone else, but he was burning his own flag. Yeah, well, that part wasn't developed well, and I always want to look into that. But we'll leave it there, right? They probably ripped a flag down from somewhere, right? And then in the R.A.V. case, where they used the broken chair legs or something, right, table legs, for making the cross. Now, what's different, though, is that all these burnings happen in different places, right? In O'Brien, it happened outside of a courthouse, right, in a very public setting, right? In Johnson, they did it at outside of a political rally, the Republican convention. And in R.A.V., they did it on private property, right, in someone's home. All right. Now, what were the messages that were being conveyed here, right? In O'Brien, the message was, as I say, fuck the draft, right? That's from the Cohen case, right? I don't think I've assigned that one, but this case called Cohen versus California, right? They were opposing the Selective Service, similar to the Debs case we did last week or 2 weeks ago. What was the message in Johnson? The Republican Party's evil. We need to stop this, and we need to, destroy the where America's going. And what was the message in R.A.V.? It was one of racism. Right? It was an African American family, and they lit up a cross in the guy's yard. Right? They were trying to send a message of intimidation. And there's a long history in this country of cross burnings as a specific symbol of the Klan, right? Another sort of these white supremacist groups. So there were different messages being conveyed. They're being conveyed in different locations. And the cases seem to all come out different ways. And you have to keep in mind a few facts, right? These happen in different times. And the Supreme Court has developed its approach to free speech incrementally, right? Where the court is today in free speech was not where it was maybe 15 years ago, and not where it was 40 years ago. So let's go step by step, one at a time. And we'll start with O'Brien. Who got called on last? Brittany, you next? Yeah. All right, so you want to run me through the facts on O'Brien, please?
Mr. O'Brien was on the steps of the South Boston courthouse, and he burned his draft card in front of a crowd.
Yep.
They started getting attacking, so the FBI rushed them off.
Yeah.
And he was told he had a right to counsel in silence.
By the way, I just want to pause you for 1 second, right? Guy was burning his draft card, making a political point. The crowd starts attacking him. Who do the cops arrest? Not the mob committing violence, right? They go and arrest the guy burning his draft card who wasn't actually, well, maybe he was bothering people. He wasn't actually harming anyone. And this is a fairly common phenomenon known as the Heckler's veto, right? What's the Heckler's veto? The mob, by making a huge commotion and basically attacking the guy, tried to silence him. And what did the police do? They move apart the guy who's trying to convey his message. Now, I think because of a draft card burning, it's a fairly simple act, takes a minute to do. He got his point across. But there are other cases where someone's about to give a speech, or maybe they start giving a speech, and people start shouting them down and mobbing them, and then the government removes the speaker. And that allows the crowd, the hecklers, to veto the speech itself. So this is almost an example of they arrested the wrong guy. But if you think about it, can they really arrest an entire mob, or is it easier just to arrest the one guy who's burning his card? So just keep that in mind. I don't have a good answer for you yet. But Brittany, go ahead. Please finish the facts.
So they rushed him off. They told
Yeah. So he admitted it, right? This is not like a case where there's disputes of fact, right? You know, this is summary judgment. This is easy if it was civil, right? He admitted what he was doing was against the law. Okay? Right? And oops, David, what did the law actually prohibit? Tell me about this federal statute we had.
The statute prohibits the alteration or destruction of the selective service card.
Okay, very good. Now, David, let me ask you just one follow-up question. Is there anything on the face of the statute which suggests that Congress was trying to limit free speech with this law? Anything on the face of the statute?
No, nothing on the face.
Okay, very good. Right. This is what we call a statute that's facially neutral, and you'll hear me use this phrase quite a bit. Facially neutral. All that means the law, the face of the statute, there's no indication, right, that they were trying to ban certain types of expressive conduct. Right? The statute says it is a crime to protest the Vietnam War by burning your draft card. Okay, that's easy, right? I think we can all agree that this sort of statute is probably no good. Even in the cases last week, Debs and Schenck, the court said you can't criminalize the expression of an opinion, right? It's only the consequences of that opinion that they can criminalize. All right. So Gabe, on the face of the statute, right, we know that there's no indication this is based on the content of the message, right? But if you had to put yourself in the mind of Congress who enacted the statute, right, you know, what do you think they were worried about when they put this statute forward? What were they trying to do? If you just take a guess, you know, we weren't there, but just if you had to guess.
But if they specify, people will do the opposite. So, for example, one of the things that it didn't distinguish was between public and private instruction. So I think if they specified, let's say, in a public arena, then they would get in trouble. Therefore, they would do it in a private.
So you think Congress thought that by banning this, that more people are going to do it actually, in fact?
I think by making it broader, they could actually get more people to make a crime as opposed to make it more specific.
So you think they were trying to get these protesters basically in jail?
At least as a deterrence, yeah.
Oh, as a deterrent. So you think that they were saying that if we pass this statute, it will deter people from burning their draft cards?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the time that was happening in the 60s.
Good. Okay, very good. Okay, so Carl, let me ask you a follow-up, please. Why do you think Congress was so concerned about burning draft cards? I mean, what motivated this concern? I mean, they can legislate on lots of things, but why this?
Well, probably they needed the draft. They needed the new recruits, so to speak, to further the efforts in Vietnam.
Gabe, you want to add something?
Yeah, like patriotism.
Okay, so I think you guys are now on the right track, right? So Gabe says patriotism. Carlos said they need to support the draft. Was it Harrison? Yeah, Harrison. Thank you, Harrison. But how does burning draft cards frustrate patriotism? Frustrate the successful draft? What does burning a draft card do that's so dangerous?
I guess it inspires others
To do what?
to, I guess, take on an anti-war stance.
There you go. Yeah, I think Harrison's got it, right? The fear is that if someone walking on the street says, oh, look at O'Brien, he's burning his draft card, that's a good idea. Let me do the same thing. Think of our cases from last week, right? Abrams and Debs and Schenck. What were they afraid of? Giving speeches that might encourage other people to what? Not go to the draft, right? What were Debs thrown in jail for? He was opposing the war and saying, you don't need to do this. You're not the slave of capitalism, whatever the hell his message was, right? You are your own person. Don't be the body bag for the man, right? So the fear again here is actually very similar to what was at issue in the World War I cases, right? If people see this one guy burning his card, they'll say, wow, that's a good idea. Let me do the same thing. And then we'll spread the idea. And then, anyway. So Katie, but what did we learn last week? When you ban a particular type of speech, what's the effect of banning that speech?
The opposite.
Yeah, the opposite. Why is it the opposite?
I know, I guess like when you're told that you can't do something.
Yeah. So you tell the kid, don't do it. That's exactly what they're going to do, right? So it has a perverse effect, right? Why? Even 50 years later, we're still talking about O'Brien, this scruffy hippie with his draft card, right? But we're still talking about him Because he made his damn point, right? He wanted to get arrested. He didn't burn his draft card on a commune or, in a drum circle, whatever. He burned outside the courthouse. He burned it outside the courthouse in Boston. Very prominent location. He did it because he was going to get busted. He did it to make a damn point, and when they arrested him, they made a point. Think of Johnson, right? Johnson, again, didn't burn his flag in some sort of private location. He burned it at the Republican convention in Dallas. He wanted to get his ass arrested. Like that's exactly what he wanted to happen, and they gave it to him. They made him a martyr. They made him a national symbol. This guy was famous for a bit, right? Because this happened to him. So again, as a practical matter, these sorts of laws always backfire. When New Jersey, when various elements of the government sued Defense Distributed, the company I work for, right? When they sued DD, millions of people download the files, right? No one wanted these files, so they came after us. When you try to ban something, you make it more popular. And this is a message that censors will never, ever understand. They think, oh, if we just make it a crime to have the file, we'll stop the distribution. It's the exact opposite. Okay. So that's, I think, the real situation. I think that's why Congress enacted this law. And I don't think the court denies it. But the court approaches this law a little bit differently, right? I can't see name tags. That's why I can't say it. What's your name? Lance, thank you. Lance, why does the court say that Congress may have had another reason to enact this statute, independent from promoting patriotism and promoting the draft? What's like an independent reason why the statute may exist?
They said that the draft card itself served other purposes other than symbolic.
And what's the other purpose it serves?
To put on notice the people that aren't qualified for the draft.
Okay, good. What exactly what notice does it give you?
Actual notice?
Giving your property, right? Yeah. That's good. Very good. Very good. Okay, I'll pass it. Alec. It's not constructive, it's actual notice. It's very good. Alec, what purpose does the draft card itself serve?
So there's a bunch of information about a person, like their selective number.
Good.
Where they sit.
Why would this have been useful to the government back in the 60s?
Tabs.
Good. Give me a little bit more. We need tabs. I mean, you're right, but
And just it's a form of identification to tally up how many people they have that are entering the draft, so they can get
Yeah.
a census number of people that they can.
good. Yeah. So it works something like this, right? There were no computers back then. There were no databases that we have today. People didn't have iPhones that can't, check someone on the spot. So you actually had federal officers who would basically walk around a city, and if they saw a young man on the street, say, "Show me your draft card. What's your number? Produce your identification," right? Show your papers, I guess, right? What's your draft card? And if it turns out the guy was supposed to be in Vietnam and he wasn't, okay, you're getting arrested. It meant to serve as an instant way to verify if a person was actually complying with the Selective Service. Sure, it provided actual notice. It did that. But I mean, everyone knew, right? It wasn't, what? Yeah. It didn't, that wasn't its primary purpose. The real purpose, I think, was to have people checked. I knew someone when I was growing up, he'd actually served in Vietnam, and he actually stepped on a landmine, and his leg blew off. So he had a metal leg, so he got sent back home. He survived. He's still alive, decades later. He's a good guy. But he was one day walking around New York City, and one of these federal officers said to him, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing nothing." He's like, "Where's your card?" And he showed him his card. He still had it, and he was supposed to be in Vietnam. He's like, "Why aren't you in Vietnam?" He's like, "I don't know." So basically, he just went for fun. And the guy basically brought him in, had him question, and said, "So why are you not in Vietnam?" He just lifts his pants up, and he shows him. He's like, "Let's him go." So, but this was an actual thing. They would basically pick people off the street, demand your card. Now, here we have a situation where we have two motivations, right? I'll call it the actual motivation, and then a motivation that can justify the law. And very often the government acts with mixed motives, right? They'll have a really good reason and then a not so good reason in the background. And generally when we have restrictions of speech, right, we apply what we might call strict scrutiny. If there's a good reason and a not so good reason, you lose. The government loses, right? They need to have really good reasons. But in this case, the court is willing to accept this other reason, right? Costa, this is an important point. How come in this case, O'Brien, they're willing to consider this independent, this other reason about record keeping, and not just kill the law because it's based on suppressing, promoting patriotism? What's the key fact the court doesn't give this one strict scrutiny?
Well, is it the speech and non-speech elements of it?
Okay, now you're talking, right? Give me more.
So they basically kind of say that conduct contains both speech and non-speech elements.
Good.
And a substantial governmental interest in that conduct would allow regulating the non-speech element.
Okay, so the court has some difficulty here, right? If O'Brien had been at a street corner and had been screaming, I hate the draft, I hate the draft, and the governor arrested him for saying, I hate the draft, I think everyone agrees that would be unconstitutional. If he was handing out pamphlets, unlike Debs and Schenck, right? But if he was handing out pamphlets saying, the draft is evil, I think everyone agrees, at least today, that he can be prosecuted. But he chose a different form of communication in that he lit his draft card on fire. He didn't say any words. He might have said some words, but that wasn't what he was arrested for, right? He was busted precisely because he did not engage in what you might call pure speech. He engaged in some conduct that was designed to express information. And the O'Brien test, and we'll get to the 4 factors in a minute, right? The O'Brien test is very important because it started to establish how courts will consider cases that are mixed with some speech and some conduct. That is, your actions convey a message that you're burning a draft card, or you're burning a flag, or you're burning a cross, as it were. And what the court says here is when you depart from a pure free speech, actual like words, or words in a pen, perhaps, we're going to give it a little bit more deferential standard of review. Now, you might recall from con law, we have these different tiers of scrutiny. You have strict scrutiny, you have intermediate scrutiny, and you have rational basis. We have similar rules in con law for First Amendment. Generally, content-based restrictions and viewpoint-based restrictions are given strict scrutiny. But if you have a case like O'Brien where it's mixed, where there's conduct and speech bundled together, right, conduct and speech bundled together, the court gives it what you might call intermediate scrutiny, where the government can basically win if they can show that there's some reason for their actions that's independent of suppressing free speech. That's the 3rd factor. I'll get back to the test in a minute. But the most important fact for O'Brien is, how do you get there? Does O'Brien apply or not? And that's the much tougher question. I was in court last week arguing that O'Brien does not apply to our case, that we are supposed to be reviewed as a content-based restriction. And New Jersey, others, I said, no, you are an O'Brien. And the reason why they want to be in the O'Brien test is it's a lot easier for the government to win. And I want to be in strict scrutiny because that means I win, right? And I get fees, right? And the First Amendment wins, of course. But the key threshold is, are you in the O'Brien test? So you have to think very carefully about whether there's a regulation of speech or if there's a regulation sort of conduct with expressive values. And sometimes that's an easy line to draw. Like in this case, I think it's an easy line to draw. In other cases, it might be very blurry. What if someone argues that, their possession of child pornography is meant as a way to protest child pornography laws, right? That they're trying to object to this sort of draconian regime by putting these files on the internet. Conveying a message, no doubt. But is it primarily about speech, or is it primarily about posting child porn on the internet, right? These are hard questions, and I mean, there's no good answer. Yeah, Nathan?
So intermediate scrutiny wasn't really established until the 70s, though.
And it's not called intermediate scrutiny either in this case. You won't find those words in O'Brien. It's not. I don't think the court actually calls it that. But generally, we refer to this as the O'Brien test is basically intermediate scrutiny. That's how it's generally known, but they don't call it that. And indeed, what case is the 68? The court hadn't even done gender intermediate scrutiny yet. I think until the mid-70s, if you recall, with Frontiero. Yeah, Cameron?
I was wondering, you know, they say like timing is everything. If it had been the same court, let's say like 5 to 10 years after the Vietnam War, do
Yeah.
you think the same court still comes, or just because they're in the middle of all that?
I've had the exact same thought. I think this case is very much a product of 1968, and the war was raging. This case came out, maybe 10 years later, after the war stopped, after the draft stopped. It may be different, but again, there was no draft, right? So generally, when you have this draft is when the issue is most salient. So it's a chicken and egg. You're not going to have the case where there's no draft. And if there's no draft, they probably wouldn't have this prosecution. No. Right? If I went and I burned, I'm assuming at least the guys here registered for selective service, if I go and burn my draft card in Times Square, no one's going to do anything to me. No one's going to care because we don't actually have a. Do they still give? They don't give a card anymore, do they? I don't think so.
It's part of your license.
You can print it out, I guess. Yeah, I did when I was 18 some years ago, and or even then it was online, so I don't even know. Okay, so let's do the 4 factors. Marissa, you want to give me the 4 factors, please, of the O'Brien test?
Yes. So the
Thank you.
first is that it has to be within the constitutional power of the government.
Okay, so what is it?
The conduct, him actually burning the.
No.
Oh, the power to regulate.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, right. So the first factor is, does the government have the power to regulate this conduct? And that answer is almost always yes. Right? It's going to be yes. If you're talking about the federal government, under modern law at least, they can do whatever they want, with very few exceptions. And the states can do even more than that. So the first factor is basically a wash. It doesn't really do anything. I don't even know why it's there. Joseph, what about the second factor of O'Brien test?
If it
Oh.
furthers unintended or substantial government interest.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. So this is actually, though, important, right? If you remember the tiers of scrutiny, when we have a strict scrutiny, the law must be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling interest, right? Compelling means really important, right? Like national security, something like that. But this is a little bit different, right? It has to further an important or substantial interest. So it's not quite as high up as compelling state interest. It's somewhere a little bit lower, but still got to be important. Again, this test is probably always going to be satisfied, right? Will the government really do something that's not important? I don't mean to make this a little bit mocking, but there's not much teeth here, right? If it wasn't important, the government would be doing it. But at least in this case, protecting the draft is important. I think we can all agree on that. So now, Joseph, let me call on you. So the third factor is where all the action is, right? This is, I think, the most important factor in the O'Brien test. So, Joseph, tell me the third factor.
If the governmental interest is unrelated or related to the suppression of free expression.
Okay, very good. Tell me what that means.
So if whatever enacting law or regulation the government sets out, it has to be actually related to the, expression or whatever could be wrong with that expression.
Yeah.
The regulation has to meet that problem, whatever it could.
Yeah. So this is what we sometimes call a means and fit, right? Are the means related to the ends? So here they assert that the reason why they prevent the destruction of the draft cards is to preserve paperwork, so that people have these cards on their person, and if they're, for whatever reason, arrested, they can give a justification for why, why they're not in Vietnam, whatever, right? But the key word here is unrelated, right? The government always has an interest in taking some sort of action, but the interest they have has to be unrelated to the suppression of free expression. In other words, they can't come to court and say, we are banning the destruction of draft cards. We think these damn hippies are unpatriotic, right? If that was their answer, then they're going to lose the O'Brien test. Have this law to promote patriotism. Is that within the constitutional power of the government? Yeah. Does it further an important interest, patriotism? I think so. But is it unrelated to the suppression of free expression? No. And that's why O'Brien lost. Because the government articulated a reason that was independent, unrelated to suppressing anti-war sentiments. And that's a key factor. And usually, if you're going to win an O'Brien, it's on factor number 3, right? For the government, that's your thing, right? You want to win on factor number 3, saying, look, we understand that Mr. O'Brien had a message to convey. We're not going to dispute that, but we're here not to censor speech. We're just here to promote government regulations. We want to have an effective program. We want people to have these cards on them. And it's not crazy, right? I mean, before computers, that card served a valuable function if you have that on your person. And I think the court agreed basically, entirely that this justification works. So again, factors 1 and 2, I don't think do a lot of heavy lifting. 3 is usually the biggie. Any questions so far? All right, Evan, let's look at the 4th factor.
What factor is incidental conviction on alleged personal freedom of greater is essential to the furtherance of that.
Okay, so tell me what that means.
I guess it's a kind of narrowly construed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is, this is, if you want to think of scrutiny, the narrowly tailored part, right? Right? How narrowly tailored is the statute to the goal, right? How close is the fit between the means and the ends? So if the goal is to make sure that people have these cards, Evan, is this a pretty narrowly tailored way of doing it to make sure they can't destroy them? Yeah, I mean, look, if your goal is that people have these cards on their person, then yeah, you can't destroy it. You can't mutilate it. That's a very narrowly tailored approach. But again, it doesn't say narrowly tailored. The language that the court uses is incidental burdens, right? Restrictions, right? So does it restrict his free speech? Yes. He can't convey his anti-war message. But is his burden, not that big, right? Is it not that great? The court says that's fine. When I was in court last week, we had this issue, right? And I actually told the judge, I was actually putting all my eggs in element number 4. I said, Judge, basically, even if O'Brien, they satisfy the 3rd factor, they lose on the 4th one. I think I made this argument very clearly, that there's not enough tailoring, right? That the New Jersey law bans all files that can be used to make a gun. So if I put a file on the internet of how to make a nut or a bolt that could be used to make a gun, I've committed a crime. So I was arguing narrow tailoring the 4th factor of O'Brien. See if it works. Probably not. We'll see. Yeah, you never know. You never know. One of the good things about argument is you make your argument, you just sit and wait, and then it's out of your hands. You can't do anything about it. But usually all the actions in number 3, but sometimes number 4 plays in if the statute might have a little bit more narrow tailoring. It's too great. Okay. So that's the O'Brien test. And again, the important part of O'Brien is not so much applying it, but knowing when to apply it, right? Knowing when to apply it. And it generally applies when you have some sort of expressive conduct that's mixed of both speech and some sort of actual physical action. Okay. All right, other questions on O'Brien? Yeah, Nathan.
So, just to clarify, if it satisfies the O'Brien factors, then it's given intermediate scrutiny.
It survives.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. I've been struggling with the terminology, right? Because if it meets the 4 O'Brien factors, then it's fine, right? The 4 O'Brien factors are intermediate scrutiny, if you want to think of it that way, right? If you have this sort of mixed speech conduct, you apply the O'Brien test. That's your intermediate scrutiny. And if it checks off all 4 of them, the law is constitutional. Because it's not like it doesn't satisfy it, but if you fit within the 4 factors, the law is constitutional under intermediate scrutiny. What?
I don't know if I just completely missed it, but it seemed to me that the last 2 factors were really glossed over in the court in terms of whether it related to the suppression of free
Yeah.
speech. So that kind of I don't know if I'm just confusing it, or if they really did just not really go into it enough.
Well, I think it's not so much confusing it, but under intermediate scrutiny, they're not going to put the government through the paces, right? They're not going to force the government to show that this is the exact reason. right? You have a mixed motive. You have good reason A here, protecting the paperwork, and then bad reason B over here, which is stifling hippie speech, right? And they sort of said, well, that B is there, but we're going to focus on A. And that's what O'Brien teaches. And again, the incidental burden is he can still protest the war in other ways, right? There are lots of other channels available to him to protest the war that don't involve him destroying his card. Okay. There were separate opinions in O'Brien. I don't think they're in your book. Justice Douglas, who was insane at this point, he dissented. And he basically said that the draft was unconstitutional. He was nuts. I mean, I think I told my colleagues, he actually had a stroke, I think 70 or 71, and he stayed in the court for 2 more years, and his colleagues basically excommunicated him. They said, you cannot cast any tie-breaking votes. So if there was ever a 5-4 case where he was the 5th vote, they would just re-argue the case, because the guy was just mentally, he couldn't do it anymore. This is like Weekend at Bernie's edition. A justice stays in office until they die. There's no like incapacity test or 25th Amendment test about this. So it's up to them. I know what you're thinking. I've had reporters ask the same question, but yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Any other questions on O'Brien? All right, let's go to the next case, which is Texas against Johnson. This is a, how do I put this? So today, this issue is viewed very differently than it was maybe 30 years ago. Today we have widespread protests during national anthems, professional football players, high school kids. It's become almost so common that it's hard to recall that in the 1980s, the idea of burning a flag was a felony that was prosecuted. Indeed, after Texas versus Johnson, a number of states actually ratified flag burning amendments. They actually would have amended the Constitution to prohibit flag burning. Congress passed a national statute, a federal law, that criminalized flag burning. This is supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. So it's hard today to even understand how divisive this issue was. Today it was like, whatever. You burned a flag, that's all you did? It's like, what's the big deal? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think at the time it was 48 out of 51 jurisdictions had some type of law in their books criminalizing flag burning or desecrating a flag.
Yeah.
So I think it was just 3 states.
Yeah. This was a huge deal. I mean, it's difficult to even convey. Again, today, people protesting football, taking a knee, they've probably been run out of town. This happened 30 years ago, right? But this was a huge deal. What was that? Yeah. Oh, they might get him today also.
I wrote an editorial for my high school.
Did you?
We have death threats.
On the flag burning? Yeah. This was a huge deal. Was this in Texas? Houston? Wow. Where's that? Klein. Very good. Well, thank you for that. The other point I want to make about this case is it didn't break down on your traditional liberal conservative lines, right? The 5-4 case, who was in the majority was Justice Scalia, right? Justice Scalia cast a tie-breaking vote. And Justice Stevens, who's from the more liberal members of the court, dissented. Justice Rehnquist dissented as well. Now, the Stevens dissent is not in your book, but just a brief note on Stevens. He actually served in World War II. He was a code talker. He helped with the encryption. Very, very smart guy. So he had perhaps a different perspective on the flag from his service in the military. But Justice Scalia was in the majority. And I always like telling the story about Scalia because I think it makes a point about him very well. Someone once asked him at the Texas versus Johnson case, how could you, Justice Scalia, right, the American icon, support the flag burner? And he says, let me read you this quote. He said, if it were up to me, I would put in jail every sandal-wearing, scruffy-bearded weirdo who burns the American flag. I think I had scruffy hippie before I was channeling Scalia. But Scalia says, I am not king. And there's this great story where Justice Scalia's wife, Maureen, who's still alive, she's really conservative. So here's the scene. The day after Texas versus Johnson's decided, Marina and Nino Scalia, they're at the breakfast table, and she's reading the Washington Post. And the front page story is Scalia upholds vote for flag burning. So she starts humming the national anthem. And Scalia said this, he said, quote, "I don't need this shit, I'm going to work." He left. Great story. But why am I telling you this story, right? Free speech is one of those issues on which the political lines aren't so neat. And at least today, there's a fairly broad consensus in the court. We had a lot of 9-0 decisions about the range of free speech. I think it's going to change real soon. But we've had this sort of general consensus that more speech is good. I think Scalia makes that point well. So, Cameron, you want to give me the facts in Texas against Johnson?
So this was in Dallas in '84.
Yeah.
They were doing with the Reagan re-election stuff.
Yep.
And there was a big protest in Dallas because that was going to be a big stop. There was over 100 demonstrators.
Yeah.
As they were marching through the town, going to places, talking about how they pulled a flag down from the courthouse.
Yeah.
And then when they got to their final destination, they attempted to burn it once, didn't work.
Yeah.
Got the kerosene.
Apparently it's harder to burn a flag than you think it is. Yeah, I never tried.
And so they burned it.
There's no scout badge for flag burning.
And
Go
so
on.
then when they left, someone got the ashes and buried it. But
Yeah.
out of all the 100 people, Mr. Johnson was the only one who was picked out of the group.
Okay. All right. So, I'm sorry, your name?
Gerald.
Sorry?
Gerald.
Gerald, why did Johnson decide to burn the flag at this location, at this time?
That's because wasn't the Republican convention taking place there?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he did it as a form of protest Reagan's administration.
Exactly. Now, he could have protested Reagan in a million and one ways, right? Held up a sign, handed out pamphlets, shouted from the street corner, right? There are a million ways he could have protested the president. But he chose a specific act, which is burning an American flag. Now, Jonathan mentioned that they basically stole the flag, right? Couldn't they have just charged him with, theft? Right?
Wasn't it that he accepted a flag handed to him?
Well, accessory to theft. I don't know. You make up the charge, right? Conspiracy to theft. A creative district attorney can come up with a charge. By the way, the person who argued this case for the Supreme Court was a district attorney. That doesn't happen anymore, right? The actual ADA assistant district attorney who argued in the Texas court got the Supreme Court argument. That will never happen ever again. In fact, somewhat funny, bad story. Did I tell this about Lawrence v. Texas? So I'll have an addendum to it, right? So the case of Lawrence v. Texas should have never gone to the Supreme Court. But our district attorney, at the time, a guy named Chuck Rosenthal, an alum of this law school, decided he wanted to make a political case out of it, so he appealed to the Supreme Court. At the time, Greg Abbott said, don't do it. Ted Cruz says, don't do it. Don Willett said, don't do it. He did it. And he argued very poorly. So generally, you don't have the ADAs arguing. He actually emailed me about a week ago. So I wrote an exam question last semester that got some press. And then Chuck Rosenthal said, I'm with you, Josh. So I don't know, whatever. The emails I get, right? Judge a man by the company he keeps? I don't know. Anyway, oh, Dana, that's way too small of a font to read. I can't see that. That's okay. That's okay. And I remember your name, but that was like, what the hell, those letters? So he argued that he was burning this flag to convey speech. Now, what exactly did Texas charge him with? What was the Texas statute that was in the books then?
Or desecration of a venerated object.
Okay, desecration of a venerated object, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did that statute apply to? What are these venerated objects?
Well, I guess the flag.
Yeah, the flag. So Dana, if I just burned, I don't know, a portrait of Ronald Reagan, maybe that's a bad question, would that be a venerated object? Probably.
Depends what the court says.
Yeah, so I mean, even the idea of what's a venerated object, I think requires a subjective determination of the content. I was actually at the Reagan Library. Have you ever been to the Reagan Library? And isn't it gorgeous? Yes. Stunning. I went to a conference there this weekend. It's in the hills of California. It's beautiful. I've been to about 7 presidential libraries. Nice one I've ever seen. Anyway, go if you can if you're in California. Now, so Jesse, the statute applies to venerated objects, right? So if I just burn, a few pamphlets, it's probably not a crime. Now, what is the government's justification, or what justification does the government offer for why they are imposing this ban on flag desecration? What arguments do they give? You have it? You want me to come back to you later?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to you later. Jessica?
They talk about the compelling state interest, but they talk about disturbing the peace, and the flag means more than just a flag. It's like a symbol.
Okay, good. So they give two justifications, right? First, they want to prevent what might be called breach of the peace, right? And I think that's a idea, right? You don't want people mobbing and creating violence and danger, right? In the abstract, that sounds okay. And the second one, I think Jessica put it, was that they were trying to promote the flag as a symbol of national unity. Now, what reason do they not give here, right? Jesse, try this one, right? What's the real reason why they have the statute?
Probably so that they don't want them burning the flags because it's a symbol.
And it's and it's viewed as
not a good idea.
Because it's
Offensive.
offensive. There you go. Thank you. Very good. It's disrespectful, right? The real reason why 49 or 48 states, whatever it is, have these laws in the books was because they want to throw it offensive. They said this is offensive. It's disrespectful to the troops, right? It's disrespectful to the people who died for their country. We want to suppress this message. Now, good?
Is that just like kneeling?
Well, there are a lot of cases now about high school kids getting suspended for kneeling, and those cases always lose for the government. They can't do that, right? You can't force someone to salute the flag. You can't force someone to, I guess, stand during it. You can't punch them. At least in a public school. In a private school, different ball game. Oh, good. Ball game, yeah. Right? So the government didn't say the real reason, right? Which is offensive speech. But they gave alternate reasons, right? Unrelated reasons. Unrelated reasons why they're limiting the speech. What are they trying to do? They're trying to hit the third O'Brien factor, right? They're trying to hit the third factor of O'Brien, which says if you have an unrelated reason, then you can restrict the sort of speech conduct blend. And they give two reasons, right? Breach of the peace and promoting the flag as a symbol of unity. Everyone with me? So Kyle, let's take the first one first, right? Why is Justice Brennan not particularly persuaded by the first example, which is the breach of the peace? Why is Brennan not particularly persuaded by that?
Well, just off memory, I believe he was saying that the whole point of the First Amendment is to protect offenses.
Oh, good.
The reason that you want to prohibit the speech is because it makes people angry, then that's the speech that needs the most protection.
Oh, very good, very good. He says the First Amendment invites dispute, right? That's what it's there for. If I just make a non-offensive, boring point, none of you will listen to me, right? And I think I'll use the example of Twitter. If you go up and tweet boring stuff, you'll have 0 followers, right? If you tweet really offensive crap, my God, you'll have millions of followers. All these Russian bots will follow you, right? It's true. And Brennan says the First Amendment is designed to protect speech that does invite dispute. Now, you can criminalize perhaps inciting a riot. It's a narrow exception. And there's a case called Brandenburg, which is cited, right? The Brandenburg test comes from a case called Brandenburg against Ohio from the 1960s. And the facts of the case were like this. You had a Ku Klux Klan rally. And the head of the Klan rally says, you know, we're going to march on Washington and we're going to do all these racist things. And we're going to do it in a few weeks. We're not going to do it now, but we're going to do it later. And someone recorded the video of him saying that. And then the state arrested him and tried to prosecute him for basically organizing crime and organizing criminal activity. Now, you might think, wait a minute, Josh, under, the case we studied last week, Debs and Schenck, right? Can't you criminalize speech where the likely consequence is crime? The tendency of speech will be crime. That's why those cases are not good law anymore. Brandenburg says, no, that's not the test. There must be, and here's the key phrase, an imminent incitement of violence, right? Are you inciting violence now? It's let's go burn that down right now. Let's go march to Washington now. You're rallying a criminal riot. If you're saying, let's go in a few weeks, that's not going to cut it. It has to be imminent. Imminent. Okay? That's an important precedent. So here, merely burning the flag or burning a venerated object is not going to create an imminent breach of the peace. If people want to breach the peace, it's because that's on them, right? It's not the speaker doing it. It's because people react to it. This is a Heckler's veto. Think of O'Brien. He burned his draft card. They started mobbing him and beating him up. It wasn't O'Brien. It was the other guys, right? So you're starting to think, wait a minute, how did O'Brien go this way? And how did Johnson go the other way? We'll pinpoint that in a minute, but you start seeing some tensions between the two cases. And maybe the tensions just 20 years happened, and we're in a different time. Right, so Whit, let me call on you next. So the court basically dismisses, because of Brandenburg, this notion that, there could be a breach of peace. Oh, they also cite this case called Chaplinsky, 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 which is an old case from the 40s, I think 1942. This is the so-called fighting words doctrine, which Scalia talks about. And this is a test that I don't think has any relevance today, because we say offensive crap all the time and we can't punch someone in response. But the idea was, if someone says something that challenges your honor, that makes you so angry that you would punch them in the face, that speech was not protected, because they basically, they made you do it. My doorbell keeps ringing. I'm not there, sorry, not coming. During class last semester on Halloween, I was giving out pocket constitutions, at a little pumpkin with constitutions, and people were taking them, and it was very cute. And all the videos are adorable. These little kids will go, oh, thank you for the constitution. It's really cute. But anyway, it was good. It said in the pumpkin, the living constitution's a trick, the original constitution's a treat. And I had little constitutions in there. You're welcome. You're welcome. There's candy there also, but there's also constitutions. Anyway, so we have Brandenburg and we have Chaplinsky. Okay, wait, let's talk about the second interest, right? That the flag was a symbol of national unity and nationhood, and Texas was trying to preserve that symbol. Why is that justification not going to cut it here, Whit?
The court cites a bedrock principle of free speech, and that is that the government cannot prohibit an idea simply because society finds it to be merely offensive or disagreeable.
Yeah.
So when they get into that area of regulation, it immediately becomes improper.
Yeah, exactly, right? The entire idea that they want the flag to be a symbol of unity is itself an idea, right? It's an opinion. Some people might view the flag as a symbol of unity. Johnson might see it as a flag of oppression, whatever it happens to be. So for that reason, they say that this is not good. You're still communicating a message. It is related to suppressing views, right? If instead of burning the flag, he put the flag up on a pedestal, literally, right, and shine a light on it, he would not be arrested. It's only the destruction of that flag that was a crime. So here, we're focusing on the third fact of O'Brien. The court knocks away the unrelated justifications, right? So it's not like protecting the draft. This is no good justification. So the court says all you have left is suppressing free speech. Therefore, the third fact of O'Brien is not satisfied. We are not in the O'Brien test. Instead, we have a content-based restriction, and we go to strict scrutiny, right? And once we go to strict scrutiny, the court calls out the BS. They say, look, this is not about protecting unity. You're trying to censor and suppress speech from these hippies, people burning the flag. That's what this law is about. There's no flag exception to the First Amendment. And there's a great quote from Justice Jackson. You probably remember Justice Jackson for his Youngstown opinion, but probably his one of his famous opinions was a case called West Virginia versus Barnett, which involved Jehovah's Witness children who didn't want to salute the flag, right? And by the way, I think I mentioned this last semester. We salute the flag like this, hand over your heart. In the 40s, it was like this. It was basically the Hitler salute, right? Look at the pictures. It's true. And the Jehovah's Witness, it went against their religion to have to respect an idol, and they consider the flag an idol. So Justice Jackson gave this very famous quote, which I love. The guy could write. He says, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein." And this gives rise to what's called the compelled speech doctrine. You can't force someone to speak and convey an expression. It also means that you can't punish someone who expresses an opinion that you find disagreeable. So this opinion from Jackson and Barnett is cited a bajillion times. It's a very, very good opinion. Okay. Brennan closes by saying that the most appropriate response to a flag burner is to wave your own. And this is the marketplace of ideas theory, right? That if you have these flag burners on the one hand, you have these people waving their flag on the other, you can pick and choose who do you want to be with, the flag burners, the flag wavers. Okay. The way to preserve the flag's special role is not to punish those who feel differently about these matters. It's persuade them that they are wrong. This is Holmes, the marketplace of ideas. Okay. Any questions on Texas versus Johnson? Yeah, Colby.
Just both of the cases we've covered so far. It's more of like a totality of the circumstances based off each First Amendment case.
Man, what do you mean totality of the circumstances?
Well, you have to look at each individual fact in order to make sure to see what's behind the purpose of each fact.
Yeah. Let me explain it like this, right? When you're talking about equal protection due process, it's very fuzzy. You have these standards of review, these tiers of scrutiny that don't actually matter. It's worse with the First Amendment, right? You always have a similar scenario. The government says, oh, this is O'Brien, we have an unrelated justification. The plaintiff says, no, this is about suppressing speech. I made this argument last week in court. And depending which test you pick, are you in strict scrutiny land? Or are you in intermediate scrutiny land? Right? Depending which bucket you fall into, it basically determines the outcome of the case. Right? If you're in the O'Brien test in Johnson, O'Brien test intermediate scrutiny, the government's probably going to win. But the key point is the court buying your justification, right? Or is the court saying that this justification is bogus? These are very fuzzy standards. And if you don't believe me, the next case proves it, because it almost doesn't even follow from Johnson. It's like, where'd all this other stuff come from, right? Isn't burning a cross just like burning a flag? All right, other questions? Yeah, Andrew?
So, I guess, slightly unrelated to this, but what's the difference in how, like, fighting words are unprotected, but hate speech is protected?
Okay, so I'll allude to this when we do Scalia's opinion, R.A.V.
Kind of bring about the same result.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a very good point. The fighting words doctrine is old. I think it's from 1942, Chaplinsky. That was before the Supreme Court invented any of the free speech doctrine. It's almost like an exception, right? And I don't think it has much weight anymore. Scalia tries to explain away fighting words in R.A.V. where it's not restricting based on the content, but on the likely effect of where it's going to happen. But I think Andrew's point's well taken, that if someone's burning a cross on your lawn, you might want to punch the guy out. And if that's the test, then a lot of these speeches are not protected. So the way I would describe it is not really an exception that matters anymore. And there was a case 2 or 3 years ago where one of the justices said, do we still even have a fighting word exception? Does it even exist anymore? And I would say it probably...
Because I know we saw that, I mean, unfortunately, we saw that a lot with the election. You see people burning flags, and you know, you see these old military guys go up and grab the flags and push the other people away and stop them from doing it, and it's just like.
And I think the guys who grabbed to be prosecuted for assault.
Yeah.
It's not a defense, right? Yeah. I think also the fighting words doctrine is based on a time where we had like honor in society. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
No, we're all trash. We're all garbage. Huge dumpster fire. Yeah, Jonathan.
I don't think you can objectively state in the moment which it is. It's something you look back on and you look at all the circumstances around it, like how likely was that to incite actual imminent lawlessness and violence in that situation.
It's why it's very hard to have these prosecutions. I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, I think it was Michael Brown in St. Louis, right after the verdict for Michael Brown, where the police officer who shot him was basically acquitted. Michael Brown's father got on top of a car and he said, "Let's burn this motherfucker down." And indeed, there was a huge riot after that. He wasn't prosecuted for inciting violence. And I think I asked my class at the time, could he have been? And I think it's a tough thing. I mean, there's a lot of emotion. People might have done it anyway, independent. Was there intervening cause, like in terms of tort, right? These are hard standards, which I think means you're not getting prosecuted under modern law. If you have the old standard from the 1920s, where if the tendency of your speech is create violence, then yeah, he can be prosecuted, no questions asked. But if it's imminent. Any other questions on Johnson? Okay, let's go into the next case, which is R.A.V. versus St. Paul. So 1992. Let me just mention a few other bits. After Johnson, President George H.W. Bush, who just passed away recently, he called for an amendment to ban flag burning. It probably would have passed, but instead Congress passed a stupid statute. Now we think, wait a minute, Josh, what the hell, right? If the Supreme Court declaring constitutional a state law, why would the federal law be any different? It's not, right? I still don't understand why this was even a thing. It was sort of like a cop-out, whatever. But the federal law was declared unconstitutional about a year later. It was invalidated by the same 5-4 majority as in Johnson. So, whatever.
In 2006, they tried to amend the Constitution, and it failed by only one vote.
Which amendment are you talking about?
They tried to amend the Constitution to make flag burning illegal, and it failed by one vote.
In 2006, they still don't have enough votes? Okay. Well, it's not going anywhere now. Okay. All right, let's do R.A.V. And by the way, the reason why the case is called R.A.V., when you have a minor in court, you use the person's initials. So the minor's name was R.A.V. I don't know what the kid's name was. I was an adult, I suppose. And again, just that, to underscore the point, you have basically teenagers burning a cross on someone's lawn. These are some messed up kids. These are some messed up kids. I think we can all agree on that. They broke a chair and they took the chair legs. I mean, these kids probably deserve to have some other criminal activity. Trespass, right? They broke in someone's property. Starting a fire in someone's lawn is not a good idea. So I think there were a host of normal crimes that they could have convicted these kids of without going to this bias motivated statute. But R.A.V., the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, wanted to try out the new statute, and they picked this case. Probably not the best case to pick, but they picked it. Okay, Dyer, tell me about the St. Paul bias-motivated crime ordinance. What a mouthful.
Basically, it said that if you put a symbol on public or private property, that be it graffiti or some other characterization, that was done to arouse anger.
Good.
And others on the basis of race, color, religion, or gender.
Good.
You commit disorderly conduct and you're guilty of a misdemeanor.
So the statute makes it a crime to place in public or in private property a symbol of some sort that you know might reasonably arouse anger, alarm, or resentment in others. Anger, alarm, or resentment. Dyer, What does that mean?
Somebody's gonna find it offensive?
Yeah. Yeah. Someone might find the speech offensive. I think that's the most simple way to explain it. And the statute gives examples, right? Burning a cross or a swastika. And it's on specific bases: race, color, creed, religion, or gender. Would not apply to, for example, if you burn a picture of Ronald Reagan as a matter of political protest, that's fine. If you would, I don't know, burn a rainbow flag, sexual orientation was not on the list back then. If you burn a picture of a veteran because you oppose war. So the statute picks certain types of protected categories, not others. And then if you engage in sort of public or private speech that someone might find offensive on the basis, you are now guilty of a crime. All right? All right, I think McKinney, you're next. So McKinney, does the O'Brien test apply to the statute, this ordinance?
No, because I think it fails the.
Well, before we get to whether it fails it, are we talking about speech or conduct here?
It's both. It's speech and it's.
Okay, very good. You notice the statute does not apply to speaking, right? So if I go up and call someone a racial slur, voice, right? That's not covered by the statute. If I go up and I say to someone, I'm giving you an anti-religious slur, right? That's not covered. If I hand someone a pamphlet with a racial slur in it, that's not covered. But it's specifically putting a symbol or object on property, whatever that means. Okay? That's actually the crime that's being committed. All right? So Nathan, the O'Brien test applies because we have some mix of conduct and that's expressive, right? You're putting up a symbol to convey some message. Does the government have the power to ban putting up symbols as a general matter?
No.
Well, the first fact of O'Brien, can they generally?
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Does this further some sort of, important governmental interest? Eliminating racism?
According to this court, no.
So it's not, well, they say it's not compelling, right? But would it just be important?
Oh, yes.
Under O'Brien, okay. Yeah, very good. Okay, so we're on the same page. So let's look at the third fact of O'Brien for a minute, right? Is this ordinance, do they have a reason unrelated to the suppression of free speech to have this law?
They say that they are trying to keep racial tensions down, which is true, and the court acknowledged that is.
Yeah. Do they dismiss it?
Yeah. They say that there are other ways.
Oh, okay, but you're going to factor 4, aren't you? I'm doing it at a time, right? So I think we can all agree that the state protecting racial harmony is not directly related to free speech, suppression of free speech. Right? Think of the ministering of the draft, right? They have this thing, they want to maintain equality. Where I think the statute falls, and Nathan was tiptoeing around his last answer, which I appreciate, was the fourth O'Brien factor, right? The incidental burden on speech. So, Noel, does this law impose a pretty substantial burden on free speech, at least according to the majority? They don't talk about this. If you notice, I'm going off the book, but I want to walk through O'Brien just so you guys get the feel, right? Is this burden substantial, right? Does this law bring a lot of protected speech that shouldn't be burdened? Does this law leave other channels for people to express racist thoughts?
There are many other channels that can be taken to obtain the same result.
Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Why is this not O'Candor O'Brien? Why? John?
The same reason the last case, because it would be a permitting a state to prescribe what shall be orthodox, and that it's one way. You're saying.
Right, but in O'Brien, I'm sorry, in Johnson, the court said that the state's justification about breach of peace was bogus, and they said that their interest in preserving national unity was expression.
We're talking about the actual content.
Yeah,
of the law.
but here the city of St. Paul gave an interest that I think is unrelated to expression of free speech, which is racial harmony. Why does this not?
Because it favors one type over another.
Favors one type of what?
Speech, and that's what I'm saying. It's one direction. It's like, okay, you can't be anti this or that, but it doesn't say anything about them being anti you back.
Ah, okay. So
it's not like it really bans it all. It just
so it's not really about promoting racial harmony. It's about promoting a certain type of views on race.
Bias. Not that I'm against it, but it's
okay.
There's a specific subset of people this is targeted for.
Ah, okay. So let me try to synthesize this a bit, right? John says that this is not about promoting some sort of uniform state interest. It's about picking a specific orthodoxy, racial equality in a specific fashion, which is you can't say bad things about these people. But everyone else you can say bad things about. Yeah, is that your opinion?
What's the behind the evil eye thing?
Yeah, look,
I don't
the
think
equal.
That's what it was about at all.
So it's not saying, yeah, hey, Costa.
It's basically saying that, like, you can use these, there's certain conduct for if you want to use the fighting word.
In other words, you can make fun of gay people, but not people that are based on their religion.
Exactly. It's not like.
Ah. Yeah. I think, was your hand up before, Dana?
I was going to say viewpoint discrimination.
I'm sorry?
That's the word you were looking for, was viewpoint discrimination.
Okay. Moreover, it's viewpoint discrimination, right? This type of bigotry is okay, but that type's not. Right? You can be hateful of this group, but not this group. Right? So I think one way to distinguish Johnson with R.A.V. is it picks specific viewpoints that were prohibited, and other viewpoints were just fine. So where does this fit under the O'Brien test, all right? How does viewpoint discrimination, which I think Dana said correctly a minute ago, fit within O'Brien? Is that one of the O'Brien factors? Like, I just walked through the O'Brien test. This seems to pass O'Brien. It's the dirty little secret, right? They don't apply their test consistently. Colby?
So, on the viewpoint discrimination, would it just go under the O'Brien test of whether or not it was narrowly tailored?
Maybe. That's a good idea. Or maybe their state interest isn't. Well, again, I don't think it fits under narrowly tailored because there are lots of other ways to be a racist, right? The statute permits many ways to be racist, just you can't do this one thing. And that seems like you can protest the war in 100 different ways. You can't just burn your draft card. Nathan?
Well, I was just going to say, again, with narrowly tailored, it seemed like when they said that this, in order to say that this is valid, you're necessarily saying, you know, fighting words in any other context, as long as it's not related to race, religion, creed, or whatever. So I thought that was the narrowly tailored aspect that they were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're saying so the burden is that it burdens you because you can be racist to these groups, not those groups.
Yes.
Ah. And Joseph, was your hand up also?
I was going to say that this reminds me of the fourth element of the O'Brien test, where the incidental resistance, they do seem to be greater than the essential furtherance.
Well, but what if you know these same teenagers went to this home and they went to the guy's lawn and started screaming out racial slurs at him? They could still convey the same message. They just can't do it by putting a cross.
I think the incidental restriction I was going for was the fact that one form of bigotry slurs would be allowed.
Yes, but that goes to viewpoint, right? But the O'Brien, the fourth factor, had to do with the burden on the flag burner, the draft card burner. Is the burden him that great? Can he express his views in other ways? McKinney, and then John.
I just think it's really obvious that they're trying to suppress the speech because, I mean, you have kids breaking into someone's yard and burning junk on it. There's a million and one other things they could have gone for, but they said, oh no, you're not allowed to be racist. It's like, really? Is that the real intent of this law? I mean, it's clearly the intent is to just suppress that speech when they could have gone after him for all these other things.
Yeah, like if I went and I graffiti on the guy's wall with just my name or Josh was here or El Barto, right? that'd be fine. If I put up the swastika, then I'd be a criminal. John?
But unlike any other case you've seen up till now, this law actually wants to control not only what you do in public, but what you do on your own property. And that's
I was going to mention that in a minute.
overly-
Yeah, I think that's, and that goes to the Justice White's opinion as well, right? The concurring opinion. This was a 9-0 case, but it was really 5-4, right? They didn't all agree on the rationale. So it was unanimous that the conviction be reversed. But let me pick up John's point for a bit. It applies in private, right? And does it even say on someone else's private property or your own?
It just says private property.
Right.
ambiguously.
Yeah, I know. So if you put up a cross on your own lawn, your own property, send a message to your neighbor next door, that's also a crime. If you put up a swastika flag in your bedroom, and maybe if you put a swastika flag on your window or something, and someone could walk by, and someone might take offense at it, that's also a crime. So I think the private one, I think, does have a significant impact. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. So what else do I want to say about this case? Okay. All right. So we have a majority opinion, and I'll just walk through it. The court doesn't really engage with O'Brien, but I think we can more or less reconcile it, if not neatly, I think a little bit. And they say at bottom this is a content-based restriction. It's prescribing speech based on its content, the fact that it's obscene toward this group and not that group. I'm not obscene, I'm sorry, the fact that it's offensive toward this group and not that group. The court sort of dismisses the fighting word relevance. I think your Scalia is just turning somersaults. It just seems he's really trying hard to make sense of the doctrine, right? That you're not actually criminalizing the words, you're criminalizing the non-speech elements. And Scalia is trying to take, a case from the 1940s and fitting into the case from the 1960s with 1990 doctrine, and it just doesn't fit. So if you were to ask me what my opinion is, I think the fighting word test just doesn't have any relevance. Because if you apply fighting words, these kids who have gone to jail, right? If you burn a cross on some guy's lawn, they're going to knock you out. I think that's something that brings someone to violence. So I think that it doesn't work. The court also looks at viewpoint discrimination. When your court restricts speech based on the viewpoint that this opinion is okay and that opinion is not, you're running afoul of the orthodoxy comment from Justice Jackson. They can't prescribe what is the orthodox, what is the correct point of view. And ultimately, it's not narrowly tailored. I think it applies in private as well. That's a huge problem. All right, so any other questions on the majority opinion? Any other questions on the majority opinion? Yeah, Alicia.
I do. So it says here that displays containing abuse of invective, no matter how vicious or severe, are permissible unless they're addressed on or specific disfavored topics. And then it goes on to say that, for example, the basis of political affiliation, union membership, or homosexuality are not covered. So if St. Paul had expanded their statutes, would it have been a different result, you think?
That's a good question. What do you mean expanded it?
Well, instead of saying limiting to basis of race, color, creed, religion, or gender, and maybe use different language that, forgive me, I just can't come up with the top of my head.
There's a reason why you're having difficulty. Can you enumerate every possible basis? Is it even possible?
No, but I am also, so I'm also going down a different road too. I'm thinking about these anti-bullying laws that we were passing. And so would they be held to be same?
Well, so you're talking about in schools?
I'm talking about just in schools and everywhere else.
School's a little bit different because we disruption, but we mean anti-bullying.
Well, there's, I can't remember the name of the, David's Law, I think is his name, and it's about anti-bullying, and you're not allowed to say certain things or act a certain way. It hasn't really taken, I'm just curious, they passed it, and I'm just curious.
Is this a state law? I've not heard of it.
Yes, it is.
If you can send something, I'll be happy to take a look at it later.
Okay.
School's a little bit different. I think maybe I should do a lesson on schoolhouse education one time, but generally, students have reduced constitutional rights in the classroom. They don't abandon their rights to the schoolhouse doors, but they're reduced. So if a student in a public school engages in conduct that can substantially disrupt activities, then that student can be disciplined. The harder question is what happens when they're engaging in social media crap outside of school and then it spills over into school. Can they be disciplined for it? That's a common issue that comes up now. Yeah.
Like a girl in the Northeast, you just got like charged with something by committing or convincing the guy to kill her.
Yeah, this is a very hard case. I think it was in Boston. I think it was in Boston. There was a person who basically used social media to encourage someone else to kill himself, and the person killed himself, and then she was charged with basically, was it attempted murder or some accessory to murder? It was a very high charge.
Like manslaughter.
Manslaughter, yeah, and I mean just words.
They were very pointed. She wanted it.
Oh, she wanted the guy to kill himself. Yeah, no question. The messages were, and the question is, can those mere words give rise to criminal liability?
Yes. I think they ruled that. I think she's in jail, isn't she?
Well, I mean, a jury convicted her, but then appeals start, and then they review questions of law. Right? I mean, she did it. No question, she did it. But can the statute be applied to her consistent with the First Amendment? That's the question. The mere fact that a jury convicted her is not going to. That doesn't resolve it.
I think you have rights, but you don't get waiver of consequence.
So you can't threaten someone, right? There's an exception which is referenced in the readings. You can't threaten, say, I'm going to kill you, right? The police can arrest you for a true threat.
Okay. I'm going to go back to your gun. I can tell you how to make a gun. So you're saying it's not my fault if I give you all the instructions. In fact, I give you all the materials and say good luck?
So one of the things actually argued is that the New Jersey statute lacks an intent requirement. I think to criminalize the giving of instructions, you need to have intent. So if I give you instructions on how to be a hitman and say, here's exactly how you go and kill this person, I think you could probably be charged with a crime. But you have to have a very specific intent. Merely putting might be negligent, but it's not intentional. I made that exact argument last week. The mens rea. Yeah, Dana?
That reminds me of like the doctrine-assisted suicide.
Yeah, well, with assisted suicide, you're actually putting a tube in someone's mouth. So that's not so much speech, it's more conduct. But what if I publish a book of how to kill yourself? Or what if I give very detailed instructions to a cancer patient, step by step, telling them how to kill themselves, step by step. Here's what you do first, you do this second, you do this third. Right? Is that similar to the case John mentioned a minute ago, where you're giving someone instructions to kill themselves? It's a very hard line. Okay. Yeah, David?
I mean, it makes me think about like some of the hate crime, the hate speech laws that we've passed, those seem like they've run afoul of actual viewpoint discrimination.
Well, what hate speech laws are you talking about?
Well, I mean, maybe the ones where if somebody's committed a crime and then because it was a hate crime or hate speech was involved, it's so much worse.
Okay, so let me be very careful. People often say that in America we have hate speech laws. That's not accurate. We have hate crime laws. And what does that mean? If you commit a crime with a certain mens rea, you have a higher sentence. So for example, if I just go and punch someone randomly in the street, maybe I get a year in prison. But if I say, hey you, and I call him a racial slur and punch him, I had a different mens rea. Right? I was motivated by some sort of racial animus. Your sentence becomes greater. It's a different crime. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything constitutionally problematic about states punishing people based on their mens rea when there's a criminal act, when there's an actual crime, violence, beating them up, whatever, right? Where some countries in Europe go a little bit differently is words, spoken words, printed words, tweets, blog posts, memes, where just the speech itself expresses racial or religious hatred, whatever it is. Can that act give rise to criminal liability? And the United States answer, at least now, is no. Otherwise, I'm going to, that's the answer now. Might change in the future. we don't have hate speech laws in this country, but they do have hate crime. So you have to have a physical act. And if your mens rea is different, they can charge you differently. So that clear things up a little bit?
And that's solely just because America is the only country with a freedom of speech.
We are, we're unique in the world in a lot of regards. The right to bear arms is one of them, and the right to free speech is another one. For example, you guys studied New York Times against Sullivan, right? The slander case, the libel case from the torts, I think. I think they're reading next week. In Europe, they don't have that, right? If you slander a public official, it's a regular tort case. You don't have to show actual malice. I don't know if you just saw, but Melania Trump, there was a story in the UK Guardian or the Telegram, one of the UK rags, and they basically wrote this story about Melania Trump that's full of falsehoods. They published this massive apology, going line by line, retracting each of their claims, and apparently they paid her a lot of money. Because the UK libel laws are very different than ours. And she probably could have sued them for a lot, because she's a very prominent public figure. In certain European countries, if you express animus towards a religion that you don't like, you can be prosecuted for it, right? And you can be fined and go to jail. We don't have that here. People may want that to be, but it's not what we have now. And again, anyone who says you can have a hate speech law, go show them R.A.V. It doesn't work. Now, that doesn't mean that the government can't suppress speech because they find it offensive. They have lots of ways of doing it indirectly. So I'm sure most of you, all of you went to college, right? I'm sure a lot of you lived on campus or on campus. Did you ever hear the phrase a hostile learning environment? Okay, what the hell does that mean? What was that? I'm sorry?
I was saying it's similar to a hostile working environment.
Oh, that was my next example. Not all of you had jobs. You all went to college. I'll do that one next. There's a related concept of a hostile working environment, right? So let's say there's a professor in a college, public university, who goes in front of the class and starts throwing out racial slurs nonstop, right? That's his class. It's an opinion. It's a viewpoint, right? Can the university fire him because he expressed a racist opinion? The answer, I think, is no. But no, forget tenure for a minute, right? If he's on tenure, that's a different story, right? But if he does create what's called a hostile learning environment, which is this complicated concept I don't need to define, they say, well, we're not firing you because you're racist. We're firing you because you create a hostile learning environment. Students can't learn from you. So there are many ways which indirectly the government can punish you for engaging in this sort of racist speech. They just don't call it a hate crime or hate speech. In the employment context, some of you have jobs. I'm sure you've taken training on this, right? If you go ahead and say, I am firing you because you are of a certain race, okay, they can prosecute you, right? That's not speech, that's an actual conduct. But if you just say in the workplace, you know what, I really hate this racial group, I hate them. That's all you said. You didn't take any action, you didn't fire someone, you didn't demote them, you didn't give them, reduce their salary. They can say, well, even though it's just speech, you've created a hostile working environment, and that's something we can punish. These are not obvious concepts. You have a hostile learning environment, working environment. These concepts are in tension with the First Amendment, and there are a lot of people who think that many of these employment and university laws are unconstitutional. They're just ways of censoring speech without calling it that. The courts have upheld them, but in limited context, where if there is some sort of severe or pervasive speech that could give rise to a hostile environment, it could be punished. But it's got to be very bad, whatever that means. Eugene Volokh, who teaches at UCLA, very prominent First Amendment scholar, thinks all these things are unconstitutional. I am more or less with him on this. Okay. What do you have in mind? What else? Anything else? Oh, let's talk about Justice White. The vote again in R.A.V. was unanimous in favor of the kid, but it basically split 5-4 in the rationale. Oh, I forgot. Where was I? Oh, Alicia, I think you're next. You want to walk me through, please, Justice White's opinion?
Sure. He says that the court has emphasized time and again that the Overbreadth doctrine is an exception to the established principle that a person to whom the statute may constitutionally be applied will not be heard to challenge that statute on the ground.
Okay, so let me just stop you there for Alicia, right? So usually when you have a constitutional challenge, you say that this law cannot be applied to me in these facts, right? Because I only burn the flag, it can't be applied to me. But overbreadth is something different. In the First Amendment, you're not only challenging the law as applied to your conduct, you're saying that this law can't be applied to a lot of conduct, even if I didn't do it. And because it might be unconstitutional in circumstance X, then it can't apply to me either, right? In other words, even if the government could prosecute this guy, R.A.V., because he might not prosecute that guy, the entire statute must fall. And I think Justice White is a little bit nervous about this overbreadth doctrine because it sweeps too broadly, right? So said Alicia, on what grounds do you think this statute probably should be stopped? He's nervous about overbreadth, but does he reject it? On what grounds does White actually say that this law should be halted?
Is it what we just spoke about, that the ordinance censors only those displays that one knows?
Close?
Okay. I don't know, I guess.
Roxy? Why does White think that the statute's unconstitutional?
Because it was interpreted too broadly, and it's like just the fact that the words "in cause offense" isn't enough.
Ah, bingo, that's the key thing, right? He says, who is this? David, no, this is. He said, the mere fact, you remember my thing, right? He says the mere, messed up my scroll, okay. The mere fact that expressive activity causes hurt feelings, offense, or resentment does not render the expression unprotected. He says hurting someone's feeling is protected speech. So he rules on very narrow grounds, right? That the only injury that they assert is it causes resentment or anger, and that's not enough. But he seems to suggest that maybe if they had a different purpose, that maybe you could pass one of these statutes. Right? He doesn't exactly say what that is, but he says that maybe another statute could pass muster. Okay. All right, so any other questions on Justice White? This is an important case, I think, because the court wasn't unanimous that this sort of thing is unconstitutional. And I think there's a very strong chance, well, not anymore, but had the Supreme Court gone the other direction with the election of 2016, I was very much worried that the sort of hostile work environment and hostile learning environment and concepts of harassment would pave the way to get there. It's like, you know, we're not throwing you in jail because you burned a cross. We throw you in jail because you created a hostile civic society or something like that, right? Where it's the effects of your speech, not the speech itself, which brings us very much back to Abrams and Schenck and Debs. Yeah.
But isn't this situation that they were trying to address in the statute, it's kind of already being taken care of on its own with HOAs and then sub-communities that actually restrict that kind of speech anyway?
Oh yeah, I mean, and also a trespass statute. Right? If you go on someone's lawn, you burn a cross, you can throw them in jail. But they want to make it specifically here, right? They want to make it now. What if Minneapolis passed a statute saying it's a crime to post on Twitter or social media a symbol of hate?
That would be a violation.
In Europe, that's just fine, but in America, it's not. I mean, America, you can do whatever the hell you want. God, Twitter's an awful place. It's an awful. God, if you're not on it, don't go. It's really bad. I have more or less weaned myself off of Twitter. I only check it a couple times a day now. I've pretty much broken my habit. It took me a long time. My God, I've weaned it. It was not easy. People say, Josh, you're not on Twitter as much. Like, yeah, I know. I'm free, liberated. It's awful. It's awful. All right. Any other questions on R.A.V? I'm happier now. All right. let's do the last topic. We don't have that much time, but we'll go through it. There are actually 4 cases in this unit. I only gave you one of them, which is campaign finance, right? And why am I giving you campaign cases? Well, what's at issue in all of these cases? Money, right? A common refrain you hear is, how is money protected by the First Amendment, right? Why is spending money on political stuff considered speech? Jesse, why is this even in your book, right? Why would, in any regard, spending money on political stuff be considered speech under the First Amendment? How does it even work?
Well, it's what money can buy.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, I mean, in this particular case, we're dealing with corporations, and there's conversation in here about a big corporation versus a small corporation, and what a big corporation can afford to push out there versus a small corporation.
But let's just take a more basic point. We'll get to corporations in a few minutes, right? Why do people spend money on politics? All of you, if you ever give a donation to the FEC website, can check what you've given. I won't. But Jesse, why do people spend money on politics?
They're trying to buy you.
By who?
People, the public. They're trying to buy our vote.
Okay. So there's. I thought you were going a different direction, right? So when you give money to a candidate, let's start there, right? When you contribute money to a candidate X for office, why do you do that? Be honest.
I'm trying to imagine
No, be honest.
where I would actually give money to.
That's in general, right?
Because you support them.
You support them, okay?
In theory, that's why you're doing it.
Okay, Ruth.
So you're giving them money because then later on you expect them to give you something back.
You might call this a quid pro quo, right? Now, it's not always evil, right? You hear this quid pro quo, you think, oh my God, it's like you're giving this guy a bribe and he's going to come back and give you a special permit. It can be as simple as, I am voting for candidate X because he's going to vote for legislation I like, right? That'll promote my interests. It's not necessarily nefarious. It's not evil to vote for people and support them. Because look, if my guy wins, I'll get laws I like. And if that guy wins, we'll get laws I don't like. So I want my guy to win, right? But there's this risk when you have direct contributions, I think, we all agree, that some sort of a quid pro quo, right, an exchange. So in a very famous case called Buckley versus Vallejo, it's in your book, you don't have to read it, it's long, called Buckley versus Vallejo, the court upholds restrictions on what are called direct contributions, right, where you give the money directly to the political campaign. So the government can limit how much money you give to a candidate X. Okay? But Joyce, that's not the only way you can give money to politics. What if instead of giving money to a politician, you want to put a commercial on TV or put a newspaper ad or a billboard saying, I support candidate X, or I support the enactment of this law, or I support the repeal of this law. What do you think of that?
I think the case said that well, it said something, so it talked about how you can, but it can't be like in a negative way.
Well, does the court money directly to the candidate, Joyce, versus spending it on issues? Is there a difference there? No, Andrew?
I have to do a hard pass. Thought this was next week's.
Carlo?
Yeah, they do make a distinction that there's a difference between the two. I think in Buckley, they said that you couldn't do, I'm gonna get it wrong.
It's okay. I'll clean it up.
Across the different cases, up until we get to Citizens United, it was, you cannot do direct, but you could do indirect. Or
Yes, very good, very good. Yeah. So what the court says, right, is that Congress can limit these direct contributions because they give rise to the risk of corruption, right, quid pro quo. But Congress can't limit what are called independent expenditures, which are money spent on issues related to politics, but not the candidate himself. I don't want to give you an ultra-precise definition because it'll confuse the heck out of you. But they draw this distinction. They say, look, the risk of corruption is different in giving money right to the candidate's pocket versus giving to the issues. So if I say, I want to give $1 million to Senator X so he gets reelected, Congress can limit that. If I want to spend $1 million running advertising saying elect Senator X, that's fine. Now, this distinction from Buckley between direct contributions and independent expenditures is, I guess defensible, but it doesn't have a strong reasoning behind it, because you can argue that both types of money achieve the exact same thing by different means. Yeah, Gabe.
Well, yes, but I think that if you're giving, Senator $1 million directly, as opposed to let's say that he's pro in a specific subject, the money itself, even though you're injecting it, it's distributing by, you have to pay the media, you have to pay the newspapers.
Okay, good. And that's the argument, right? That's why the court, I think, allows it. They said merely giving money to a candidate, you're not really expressing a kind of message, right? You're not. But if you want to put this message out to the world, it'll cost some change, right? You can't put up a billboard for free. You can't put a commercial on TV for free. You can't publish a book for free. You can't do anything for free. So you need to have some money to express your idea. I mean, this would be something as stupid as if you want to protest, you have to buy poster board, right? Buy magic markers, right? If you want to protest my lectures, right? You have to actually make arts and crafts. They actually had a CUNY. They actually passed out poster boards and markers in the lobby that were making the arts and crafts for my protest. Anyway, but I think Gabe has a point, right? You need money to actually convey this idea.
It's a huge economy, like just in social media itself, you have to, there's apps, developers.
Buy paid promotions, yeah.
Yeah, even on TV or radio. So there's a lot of people. It's a huge economy.
All the followers I bought on Twitter, right? No, just kidding. I didn't buy any. People do. But yeah, exactly. It costs money. So the court drew this distinction between contributions and independent expenditures, right? So Congress can limit the contributions, but they can't limit the independent expenditures. So the effect we have today is a fairly small amount of money is given to the candidates, and a boatload is given to these independent expenditures, what are called PACs, political action committees, right? Basically, there are no limits on how much money can be given to PACs. Right, you have these wealthy donors, they can give bajillion dollars, right? I mean, we're talking, someone Googled this, in the last election, I think about $2 or $3 billion total spent in the election. It was an insane amount of money. I mean, we're talking a lot of money that was spent in the last election. Every one's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So that's easy enough, right? If you have a PAC, you can give lots of money to it. What if you don't want a PAC? Right? Having a political action committee is hard, it's burdensome, you have to create paperwork, you have to hire a treasurer, there's a lot of work involved. What if you're just a nonprofit corporation? Let's call them Citizens United. Let's say you made a movie that's critical of a candidate, let's call her Hillary Clinton, right? And let's say you want to run a commercial advertising this movie. And the money you spend on those advertisements came from corporations, right? You had various corporations say, we agree with Citizens United, we want to give them money so they can run their commercials, run their movie. The money didn't go through the PAC, right? The money only went through normal corporate channels. CU, I'll say it saves time, CU, Citizens United, CU, challenged provisions of the campaign finance law. And they argue it's unconstitutional. They argue that because the corporation can't spend this money without going through the PAC, that their First Amendment rights were violated. that it was burdensome on them to have to go through this regime. And again, this only applied, was it 30 days before the election? By a fairly small window before the election. So they could have run this commercial for, 330 days of the year, but they couldn't run it right before the election. Now I say, wait a minute, Josh. Running the commercial before the election, that's when it's hot, right? That's when the message is most valuable, right before the election, right? So we get our message out. Go look at, I'm sure you remember, the commercials last November were awful. Every freaking commercial was a political ad, one after the other, right? No one runs political ads in like March, right? You just don't do it. So the Citizens United case, and we're running current time, so I'll summarize a bit, was very controversial. You probably remember it. It was decided in 2010, so about 8 or 9 years ago. And the reason why I think it became such a high water point was at the State of the Union, a couple of days after the case was decided, President Obama spoke about it. And the justices are sitting right there, right? And it's a weird thing, if we ever say the Union ever again, we might, right? But the justices sit there, and they're sort of like potted plants, where they're not allowed to clap, they're not allowed to applaud, they sort of just sit there by themselves. And it's very awkward. And whenever I watch the State of the Union, I'm always watching the justices, that's what I think I care about. And I remember watching this live, and you're like, oh wow. So President Obama says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, the Supreme Court overturned 100 years of campaign finance law, and they opened the floodgates to foreign governments and foreign corporations spending our elections, right? It was hyperbole, right? I mean, today we look at President lying, it's like, what's the big deal? Back then, that was a big deal, right? It was, former college professor taking some liberties with the truth and the opinion, right? Whatever. I mean, I care, but no one even noticed. But the camera panned to poor Justice Alito, and Justice Alito is saying, not true. He's shaking his head, and oh God, Alito never went back to Save the Union ever again. Thomas stopped going, Scalia stopped going. Ginsburg actually, no, she hasn't gone last year. This year probably won't go again. But it was bad. Now, did the court actually overturn 100 years of precedent? No, not really. What the court did do is a case called Austin versus Chamber of Commerce. And what Austin held was that the identity of the speaker, right, whether it's a person or a corporation, matters. And Austin held that the government can prohibit speech if it's from a corporation rather than from a speaker. Justice Kennedy, who wrote the majority in CU, had dissented in Austin, 20 years earlier. And Justice Kennedy found that there's no meaningful difference between a corporation speaking and individuals, right? After all, a corporation is merely a group of people. They assemble together, right? I might have $20 in my wallet, but if I look at everyone in this room, maybe a few $100, right? You come together and you can pool together funds. The dissent, Justice Stevens, vigorously disagreed on this front, and he had a very long opinion on this part, saying that there's a long history of suspicion against corporations in this country, and that the idea of giving these sorts of rights to corporations is simply a fiction. But that only gets the first part, right? Even if the corporations have the rights, right? I don't think it's that critical, but even if they have the rights, is this restriction reasonable, right? Is the limitation that you can't spend 30 days for the election adequate? Now, if you notice, they don't mention O'Brien. They don't really mention the sorts of tests we've discussed before. Campaign finance is its own world, where each element of free speech case has like its own tests that apply to it. It doesn't bleed over. And the majority says that an outright ban in the month before the election is unconstitutional. Justice Stevens says this isn't a ban, it's just a time, place, and manner restriction. You can run your ads for 300 days of the year, which is not the last 30 days. Okay. That's basically the case. I realize I'm overcompressing. I want to finish on time. I'll go through the originals and thing in a minute, but any questions on the doctrine of what actually is held, that the state can't restrict speech based on the speaker, that's a corporation, and moreover, the 30-day restriction is an absolute ban. Nathan?
So did it also overturn McConnell v. FEC?
Yes, yeah. McConnell v. FEC was a case decided in 2003. That was before Sandra O'Connor was replaced by Samuel Alito. And McConnell upheld parts of the new campaign finance law. So the court didn't reverse 100 years of precedent, maybe 20. And that's why the president was a little bit off base. Again, back then, president lying in public was like a whoa, now it's like, oh, whatever. It's just, it's Tuesday, right? Or is it Monday? I don't even know. All right, other questions on the doctrine? Yeah, Whit?
The court was kind of like, maybe not dismissive, but they didn't find the argument that the political corruption was as valid as the state was making it out to be.
Yeah.
Like, what do you personally think on that? Because I found myself thinking that there was like a good bit of risk of corruption, at least in the sense of like private companies furthering their own interests at the expense of, environmental policy or things like that.
Right. So let me answer the question like this. If these corporations had just given a huge check to John McCain, who was the Republican candidate, you could think that, oh, they're trying to back McCain, right? Here they were actually getting money to criticize a candidate. And I think that does matter. At bottom, what the government was doing here was saying you can't criticize a candidate 30 days before the election if you do so with pooled funds. And whatever risk there is of corruption, I think is probably outweighed substantially by the restriction on speech. This is referenced in the reading, but when this case was first argued, the government actually said we can ban books, right? And if your argument is we can ban books, you're going to lose. When we were at the Fifth Circuit a couple of years ago in our case, Judge Jones asked from the bench to the government, could you ban putting a book of code on a library shelf? And the government lawyer said, yeah. So somehow we lost, but we'll win next time. Okay. Yeah, John?
Why did they let Kennedy write this? You said he never writes like anything good.
I never said that.
You did. It's your intro to a burger fellow. We can watch it.
Oh, God. Well, he dissented in Austin. I think he had a beef here. Right? In fact, Roberts didn't go nearly as far as Kennedy did. And Roberts, I think, gave us an NFIB preview saying, well, let's be careful, guys. Don't do too much bad stuff. We really have to overturn this here. Well, you just know the disclosure part. We all know in the political ads, this ad was paid for by so-and-so, or I'm Joe Smith, I approve this ad, right? The court upheld that. But Justice Thomas spends a lot of time saying that the disclosure laws are unconstitutional because by disclosing who paid for it, you face risk of harassment having your speech chilled. Because people can come after you saying, you supported cause X, I'm going to try and do bad things to you. And he has a litany of examples. I'm out of time. Okay. Any other questions on CU? I can maybe continue a little bit more next week if you need. But all right, have a good week, guys. I'll see you later.